The stories you are about to hear will be heard for the first time on this channel. They may harm you psychologically. I would appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. Good vibes. The first night out was a decision made on a whim, driven by my friend's relentless persuasion. We entered a dimly lit bar, the kind that seemed to belong to another era. Shadows clung to the corners, and the air was thick with the smell of old wood and cheap alcohol. I had never been a heavy drinker, but my friends insisted that I let loose. The first few drinks went down easily, the warmth spreading through me and loosening my nerves. By the time I was several drinks in, the world had begun to blur around the edges. Faces morphed into indistinguishable blobs, voices became a cacophony of laughter and shouts, and my sense of time evaporated into the haze of alcohol. The next thing I remember was stumbling through the door of my apartment. I don't know how I got home, but a primal rage overtook me as I entered. I don't know what triggered it, but I began smashing everything in sight. Plates shattered against the walls, furniture was overturned, and glass crunched under my feet. My vision was clouded, my mind a chaotic mess. In the back of my head, a small, sober voice screamed for me to stop, but I couldn't. When the adrenaline finally wore off, I collapsed in a heap on the floor, the darkness swallowing me whole. Morning arrived with a blinding headache and a throbbing pain that radiated through my entire body. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt like knives piercing my skull. I groaned and forced myself to sit up, my muscles protesting with every movement. My apartment looked like a war zone, and as I began to clean up, I noticed something strange. My arm felt unusually hot. Ignoring it at first, I continued to tidy up, but the heat soon turned into an unbearable burning sensation. Panic set in as I looked at my arm and saw that it was covered in bruises and deep gashes, the skin around them an angry red. Fear gripped me. I had no memory of what happened to cause such injuries, and the pain was becoming too much to bear. I knew I had to go to the hospital. I barely managed to dress myself and stumble out the door. The journey to the hospital was a blur of pain and confusion. When I arrived, the doctors took one look at my arm and admitted me immediately. They told me I needed to stay overnight for observation. It seemed ridiculous. It was just an arm injury after all, but the doctors were adamant. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I reluctantly agreed. The hospital was eerily quiet that night. The silence was almost oppressive, pressing down on me with a weight I couldn't shake. I lay in the hospital bed, the white walls and sterile smell making me feel like I was trapped in some kind of nightmarish dream. The events of the previous night were a jumbled mess in my mind, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. Despite my unease, exhaustion eventually claimed me, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I awoke in the middle of the night with an urgent need to use the bathroom. The hospital was still unnaturally quiet, and as I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, a sense of dread began to creep over me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the remnants of a bad dream. I did my business and headed back to my room, but as I approached, I heard voices. A man and a woman were arguing, their voices low but intense. Swearing and hissing at each other, they seemed to be in the midst of a heated discussion. Who would be awake at this hour, arguing in a hospital hallway? Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked through the small window in the door. My heart nearly stopped at what I saw. The figures in the hallway were not human. Their limbs were elongated and twisted, their skin pale and almost translucent. Their faces were contorted in expressions of rage and fear. They were planning something, whispering in urgent tones. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as one of them turned and looked directly at me. The creature's eyes were pitch black, devoid of any humanity. Panic surged through me, and I quickly shut the door, hoping they hadn't seen me. A loud voice erupted in the hallway, filled with panic and fear. Oh no, he saw me. What am I going to do now? My heart raced as I realized they knew I was there. The silence was broken by the sound of shuffling footsteps and low murmurs. I backed away from the door, my mind racing with fear and confusion. What were those things? And what were they planning? I felt trapped. My only option to wait and hope they didn't come for me. I sat on the edge of the bed, every sound making me jump. The minutes dragged on, each one an eternity. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, telling myself it was just a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew it was real. The creatures were out there, and they knew I had seen them. The door to my room creaked open slowly, and I froze. A shadowy figure stepped inside, its movements slow and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat as it approached the bed. It stopped a few feet away, its black eyes staring into mine. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The creature reached out a hand, its fingers long and clawed. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the worst, but nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. I was alone in the room, the silence more deafening than ever. The next morning, the doctors discharged me, unable to explain the injuries on my arm. They gave me a prescription for painkillers and told me to rest. As I left the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking figure, every sound a potential threat. I hurried home, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto the couch. The events of the past 2 days felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of dread never left me. I began to notice strange things happening around my apartment. Objects would move on their own, lights would flicker, and I would hear whispers in the dead of night. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but the fear was too real. I started seeing the shadowy figures more often, lurking in the corners of my vision, always watching. Sleep became a distant memory. Every night was a battle to stay awake, to keep the creatures at bay. But exhaustion eventually won, and I would drift off, only to be plagued by nightmares. The creatures haunted my dreams, their black eyes staring into my soul. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the darkness of my apartment pressing in on me. One night, I woke to the sound of my front door creaking open. My heart pounded as I listened to the soft footsteps approaching my bedroom. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and prepared to defend myself. The door to my bedroom opened, and a figure stood in the doorway. It was one of the creatures, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It took a step toward me, and I swung the lamp with all my strength. The creature let out a guttural scream as the lamp connected with its head. It staggered back, clutching its face. I seized the opportunity and bolted from the room, sprinting down the hallway and out the front door. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where to go or what to do, but I knew I couldn't go back to my apartment. I spent the next few nights sleeping in my car, too afraid to return home. I contacted my friends, but they were skeptical of my story. They chalked it up to stress and lack of sleep, suggesting I see a therapist. Desperate and with nowhere else to turn, I took their advice. The therapist listened patiently as I recounted my experiences, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She prescribed medication to help with my anxiety and recommended I take a break from work. I tried to follow her advice, but the creatures were relentless. They followed me wherever I went, their black eyes always watching. The medication did little to ease my fear, and the nightmares continued to plague my sleep. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a never-ending cycle of terror and paranoia. One evening, as I was driving aimlessly, I spotted a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town. Desperate for a place to rest, I checked in and locked myself in the room. The musty smell and peeling wallpaper did little to comfort me, but it was better than nothing. I barricaded the door with furniture and collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking me. I awoke to the sound of whispers, the same voices I had heard in the hospital hallway. I sat up, my heart pounding, and saw the shadowy figures standing at the foot of the bed. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, and they began to move closer. I scrambled off the bed, backing into the corner of the room. The creatures surrounded me, their black eyes filled with malice. I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. As they closed in, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear that had consumed me for weeks began to fade, replaced by a cold acceptance. I realized there was no escape, no way to fight back. The creatures had won. With a final, defiant scream, I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But instead of pain, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. I opened my eyes to see one of the creatures standing over me, its expression softening. It spoke in a voice that was both soothing and otherworldly. "You are not alone," it said. "We have been watching over you, protecting you from the true darkness." Confusion washed over me as the creature continued to speak. It explained that the figures I had seen were not malevolent, but guardians from another realm. They had been trying to communicate with me, to warn me of a greater danger that was approaching. The black eyes were a mark of their kind, a sign of their eternal vigilance. The creature reached out a hand, and I took it hesitantly. A wave of warmth and understanding flowed through me, and the fear that had gripped me for so long began to dissipate. The other figures stepped back, their expressions no longer menacing. I felt a strange sense of peace, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The creature led me to the window and pointed to the horizon. In the distance, I could see a swirling mass of darkness, an ominous presence that sent a shiver down my spine. "That is the true enemy," the creature said. "We have been fighting it for centuries, and now it is coming for your world. You must help us." I didn't know what to say, the enormity of the situation overwhelming me, but I knew I couldn't turn my back on this new reality. The creatures had saved me from the brink of madness, and now they were asking for my help. I nodded, accepting the responsibility that had been thrust upon me. The creature smiled, a hauntingly beautiful expression, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We will guide you," it said. "Together, we can stop the darkness." As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the landscape, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The nightmares were not over, but I was no longer alone in my fight. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and discovery. The creatures taught me about their world, their history, and the battle they had been waging against the encroaching darkness. They showed me how to harness the power within me, a latent ability that I never knew I possessed. I trained tirelessly, determined to prove myself worthy of their trust. As the final confrontation drew near, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. The creatures stood by my side, their presence a constant reminder that I was not alone. We faced the darkness together, a united front against the malevolent force that threatened our world. The battle was fierce, but with the creature's guidance, I found the strength to fight back. In the end, we emerged victorious. The darkness was banished, and the creature's world was saved. As they prepared to return to their realm, the leader of the Guardians turned to me with a solemn expression. "Your bravery has saved us all," it said. "We will never forget your sacrifice." With a final, grateful smile, the creatures disappeared into the ether, leaving me standing alone on the battlefield. The world was safe, but my life would never be the same. I had faced my worst fears and emerged stronger for it. The nightmares had given way to a new reality, one where I was no longer a victim, but a protector. As I walked back to my apartment, the sun shining brightly overhead, I felt a sense of peace that I had not known in months. The creatures were gone, but their presence lingered, a comforting reminder that I was never truly alone. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would be ready to face them head on.